Hey friends, Ginny D here. I got an email the other week from someone who was wondering if I had any advice on giving characters unique personalities so that they think and act differently from each other, even when they're played by the same person. And you know what? I do. For some people, creating characters with different personalities might come really naturally. But for others, it can be a skill that could use developing. Many roleplayers struggle with creating and playing multiple characters that think and behave differently from each other. If you're one of those people who worries that your characters are all kind of bleeding into each other, this video is for you. I am still relatively new to tabletop role-playing games. I've only been playing D&D for about 2 years, but I've been a writer for my whole life. I've written multiple embarrassing but complete manuscripts. I spent my entire youth doing text-based roleplay, and I even got my college degree in writing. And developing characters is just as key to writing fiction as it is to roleplaying. So today, I just want to explore a few tactics and tools for how to create characters with unique personalities. Let's dive in. This might seem like a weird question, but I think it's worth examining what a personality actually is before you start trying to create one. There are a lot of things that can be mistaken for personality, like a list of traits, or a backstory, or a motivation, or really liking the movie Fight Club. None of those things are a personality. A personality on a basic level is the combination of internal and external context. Your personality is what you think and what you do. Let's break that down a little. When I say internal, I'm talking about what's going on in someone's head. How does your character approach the world? What is their perspective? What informs their choices and their thoughts? This includes their mindset, like are they optimistic or pessimistic? This includes their beliefs, not just religious, but what they believe about the world, the story that they tell themselves. Do they believe that love always finds a way, or that bad people will get what's coming to them, or that no one can change their destiny? This can also include any misconceptions they hold or lies they might believe. When I say external, I'm talking about their actions, what they do. This is about how they interact with the world. Are they shy or talkative? Do they take risks or are they more cautious? Do they crack jokes or are they serious and straight-laced? Are they kind to the people around them or cruel or even just disinterested? Maybe this will line up really cleanly with what's in their head, or maybe it'll be very different. Not everyone acts in accordance with their beliefs. Contrast between the internal and the external can actually be really interesting to play with. The concept of a personality can be nebulous and hard to pin down, and that's because a real person's personality is made up of a million different factors developed and discovered over a lifetime. I mean, it's right there in the word personality, the nature of personhood, what makes you a person. When it comes to fictional characters, you don't need them to be a whole person. I mean, they can never be a whole person, but the more personality that you can create and imagine for them, the more unique and real your characters will feel. Now that we know what a personality is, let's talk about how to construct one. I have 3 different methods that I want to outline in this video today. These are not the only ways to create a personality, and you may reach a point where you don't need these kind of training wheels anymore, but they're great guidelines for starting to learn this skill. So unless you're starting from absolute zero, you probably already have at least one big thing that you know about your character. Maybe it's a backstory thing, like your character's mother died of a terrible illness, or maybe it's a major character trait, like your character can see ghosts that no one else can see. If you start with a big thing like that, you can sort of work backwards to develop all the little things that make up a personality that matches up with that big thing. Think of those major character-defining features as fabric, and that fabric is made up of a ton of tiny threads. If you can decide what a bunch of those little threads are, you can create a personality that's rooted in backstory, but isn't necessarily an obvious result of it. Let's try an example together. Say you have a character, Corwin, and he has the soldier background. You've decided that he grew up poor and joined the military to take some of the burden off of his family. That's backstory, but that's not personality. However, we can use it to develop personality. Remember, the same backstory could lead to tons of different personalities. Not every soldier has the same personality. Let's pull one thread together. Let's ask ourselves, how did being in the military affect Corwin's personality? How did it affect him internally and externally? Here's one possible answer. Growing up in the military has made him coarse and thick-skinned, quick to scuffle but difficult to offend. Being in constant physical peril meant that he never really learned to pay attention to his feelings, let alone talk about them. He tends to deflect with humor, often the kind of inappropriate humor that was common in the barracks. He depended on the support of his military unit, and once he gets comfortable with his party, they will receive his unwavering loyalty and trust. That's one possible way to answer the question of how being in the military affected Corwin's personality, but it's not the only way. Here's another way to answer that exact same question with a totally different personality. Corwin grew up in the military, but his country was at peace, and he didn't see any actual battle. He rose through the ranks quickly, which distanced him from foot soldiers, and instead meant that he kept the company mostly of high-ranking officers. This has left him disciplined and stiff, very respectful of hierarchy and authority. He relies on routine and may feel unsettled without it. Since his combat training was so formal, he's a well-practiced swordsman, but completely unprepared for any dirty fighting techniques. In fact, he gets upset when people don't fight fair. This version of Corwin grew up in the military too, but he is a completely different person. There are a million ways to interpret how growing up in the military might affect someone. And while you may know that all of these things stemmed from Corwin's soldier background, it isn't necessarily obvious that the first Corwin is difficult to offend or that the second Corwin prefers routine because of his background. There are a million little threads like this that you can pull. How does Corwin feel about his family? Does he feel a sense of duty to them? Does the memory of them keep him going? Is he resentful of their inability to care for him in his childhood? And how has this affected the way that he treats relationships now? The best way to identify all of these tiny threads and start unraveling the whole personality is to give yourself a lot of space and time to just pick at it. I like to open up a document and just write a bunch of bullet points. I highlight stuff, I move stuff around. Sometimes I try a few different angles on something before I settle on what feels right. This is a really exploratory, free-form method of developing a personality, and you need to make sure to create space for that if you want it to be effective.
You remind me of the vault.
What vault?
The vault with the magic.
What magic?
The magical items.
Which one?
These ones.
Oh.
You remind me of the vault. I saw this new book in a Kickstarter campaign from Kobold Press. It's called The Vault of Magic in print and PDF. I had to pledge all kinds of magic stuff inside.
Scrolls and tomes,
Weapons and cloaks.
potions and armor.
The book is called
Vault, magic vault.
Vault Magic Vault.
Magic vault.
Vault Magic
Vault
Vault.
of magic for fighting. Vault, magic vault.
Vault Magic Vault.
Magic vault.
Vault Magic
Vault
Vault.
of magic for 5e.
Pledge today
For your copy.
Pledge on Kickstarter today for your copy of Vault of Magic, a book of more than 800 magic items and rolling tables compatible with 5th edition D&D. It's available in both print and digital form, including Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, and the brand new 5e platform, Shard. They have a squad of amazing guest writers, including Luke Gygax, Todd Kenrick, and Deborah Ann Wall. I ask for so little. Just visit the link in the description. Pledge on Kickstarter, Sarah! Pledge on Kickstarter before it's too late. Okay, I'm done. I'm sorry. I just love Labyrinth so much. If the first method was sewing your own clothes, this method is buying a t-shirt off the rack. This is a quick and dirty method to basically just select a pre-made personality and apply it to your character. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think this method is lazy or bad. It's a little less freeform, but for some people that might be really helpful. So what am I talking about when I say pre-made personalities? Well, in real life, we try really hard to categorize people by personality in a lot of different ways. So in fiction, we can take one of those categories and then use it as a sort of a framework for a character's personality, basically using it in reverse of the way it's intended. There are lots of these categories that you can use. For example, astrological signs. What does it supposedly mean to be a Leo? They're creative and passionate, but can also be stubborn and self-centered. They're natural leaders, but they hate being ignored. You can complicate this even further by picking rising signs and moon stuff. I don't know anything about astrology. Other personality categories might be things like Hogwarts houses or Myers-Briggs types. I especially like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, for this because it gives us 4 really distinct dualities. So there are 16 different combinations of types, which just gives us a lot more creative flexibility. For example, one of the MBTI pairs is thinking versus feeling. A thinking character may lean on logic. They might be honest even when it's not kind. In contrast, a feeling character may really trust their gut. They think it's important to be compassionate. Both characters could be very intelligent. This isn't about being smart versus being emotional. Instead, it's asking which of the two options the character relies on when making decisions. Imagine a scenario in-game where some villain is terrorizing a town, hunting for an NPC. That NPC asks the party to help hide them. A thinking character might suggest betraying the NPC, delivering them to the villain to save the rest of the town. Meanwhile, a feeling character might be moved by the NPC's story and want to protect them. Identifying where your character falls on each of the 4 Myers-Briggs pairs will give you a short, easy list to go down to figure out how they would respond to any given scenario. Also, before it comes up in the comments, I just want to address attributes real quick. I'm sure there will be people telling me that you should base your personality on those. And I'm not saying that you can't or shouldn't incorporate things like your character's intelligence or wisdom or charisma scores into their personality. But remember that you can apply that in a lot of different ways. For example, a character with high charisma might be very charming, or they might be very intimidating or very persuasive. High charisma just means strong force of personality. You shouldn't feel married to the idea that any character with high intelligence has to behave like Sherlock or Dr. House. There are a lot of ways that intelligence can manifest itself in a personality. This method is, in some ways, similar to the previous one because it too provides you with a sort of an easy template. But if personality tests and categories are hard for you to picture or wrap your brain around, this method might be easier for you. And that method is steal. Just straight up lift an existing character or even a person you know. If you took, say, April Ludgate from Parks and Rec and transposed her into a D&D game, that's already something new. That is no longer April Ludgate. If you don't quote her lines or use the same name, most people probably wouldn't even notice. And as you played this character, she would take on a life of her own and develop her own traits based on her experiences in the game. Sometimes I'll do, like, stealing light. I'll come up with a character and then I'll fill in the gaps in their personality with another character. So maybe I'll design a half-orc fighter who's kind of gruff, and anywhere there's a gap in her personality, something that I don't know how she would think or how she would act, I'll just think, what would Rosa Diaz from Brooklyn Nine-Nine do? So the fighter isn't Rosa Diaz, but I use Rosa to inform the type of personality that I want her to have. You can also complicate this method by stealing bits and pieces from multiple characters and just mashing them together. For example, if you take April Ludgate's antisocial nature and love of animals and combine it with Elle Wood's goal-oriented determination, you might end up with a confident people hater who would burn down a whole town to save a litter of kittens. That's an extreme example, obviously, but the important thing is that the extreme character we just created isn't really much like April or Elle. She would be her own totally unique person. You can also borrow a personality from a real-life person. This could result in a subtler, more believable character, which may or may not be what you're going for. What I love about using a real personality is that often people you know in real life will do things that you don't necessarily understand or that you wouldn't do. This is a great opportunity to interrogate why they do those things. Just an exercise in putting yourself into someone else's shoes and trying to see a new perspective. Not only is it great for developing interesting characters, but it also makes you more empathetic, so bonus. I know a lot of us have a gut reaction to stealing as being wrong, and I think it's important to remember why stealing is wrong and why that doesn't really apply here. Unless you're streaming your D&D game or something, you really don't need to worry about intellectual property or copyright or whatever. If you want to just straight up play Daenerys Targaryen in a D&D game, you can. You're not breaking any laws, any more than you would be if you ran around in your backyard pretending to be Daenerys. You are playing for fun, so steal away. There they are, 3 methods that you can use to develop unique personalities for your characters. Like I said at the beginning, you might not need to follow these methods exactly in order to get creative and develop some truly interesting new personalities. If these perspectives have helped get the wheels turning and shown you some ways to think outside of the box, then I feel like I've done my job. I would love to hear what methods and tips have helped you develop more unique characters, so please tell me in the comments. And of course, if you have any D&D or character building questions that you would like me to answer in a video, feel free to let me know. Now, it's 10:30 p.m. and it is absolutely imperative that I go play Stardew Valley and drink White Claw, cause that's my personality.